Hey, Jerry Brainum. As usual, we're having a great conversation before we start meeting. So we've been talking for about an hour with all this craziness that's going on in our world. And you're out there in Southern California. So I definitely wanted to talk about, measures people can take to protect themselves from COVID, to stay as healthy as possible. Because I think one way to avoid overrunning the medical care system is to do everything that we hear, wear the mask, social distancing, wash your hands, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But what else can we do in terms of it seems to me there's no better time than to take charge of your health, be as healthy as possible,
Right.
so that if you do have the misfortune to get COVID, that ideally you only have mild, moderate symptoms or maybe even no symptoms, and you can just self quarantine at home. You don't have to overrun the medical care system. So I wanted to get into that. But first, let's talk about, you wrote a really good article in your newsletter, Applied Metabolics, about cortisol. And I think cortisol is a really misunderstood hormone. On one hand, people are always fixated on lowering cortisol as much as possible, but we actually need a certain stress curve to opt in to function optimally,
Right,
right?
right, absolutely. Cortisol is an absolutely essential hormone. As you point out, it's engendered a very bad reputation. For example, in bodybuilding, cortisol is synonymous with catabolism, muscle breakdown.
Yeah,
And there's a
yeah,
certain amount of truth to that. High levels of cortisol basically stimulate what the reason it causes a loss of muscle. Cortisol it will interact with receptors in muscle. It'll cause the efflux or the removal of amino acids from muscle, particularly the branched chain amino acids. And this, of course, eventually leads to muscle atrophy, loss of muscle. On the other hand, people, as you point out, people don't realize this. It's a double-edged, I hate to use a cliche, it's like a double-edged sword because cortisol has a lot of good effects too. And the thing is about cortisol is, as in many other things in the strength world and bodybuilding world, some of the effects of cortisol are exaggerated. In other words, people don't realize. I'll give you a quick example. A lot of people say, well, I don't do aerobics because it increases cortisol. They have this idea that doing aerobics somehow increases cortisol. Well, it only increases cortisol if it's done for extended times.
right.
And what they've shown in the studies is an hour, if you do an hour or less of, let's say, aerobics, the cortisol doesn't go up. But
Right.
what happens is, and this is interesting, I'm not saying cortisol isn't released. It's released, but not to the extent where it's going to cause muscle catabolism. Excuse me. What it does, and this is what freaks them out when I tell them this, it actually helps your body utilize fat. In other words, when you do aerobics past a certain time, the first, let's say, 25 minutes of endurance exercise aerobics, it's usually a combination of glucose and glycogen that's powering it. You don't really tap into fat, but the longer you do it, the more you tap into fat. As the glycogen stores decline, your body starts to use more fat. As it starts to use more fat, the body marshals certain substances that allow you to tap into the fat, and one of them is cortisol. Another one is
Yeah.
growth hormone. In other words, these allow you to utilize the fat as an energy source as your carbohydrate stores, which are limited, muscle glycogen limited. As they decline, the fat takes over. Cortisol plays a part in that. Another example, a good example of beneficial effect of cortisol, is after a workout. Well, let me just say that this will surprise people what I'm about to say. A couple of years ago, not that long ago, about 2-3 years ago, they did a study. They examined all the hormones in the body to see which ones were the most anabolic after a workout, right? Now, you would think testosterone would be in there and all that. It
Right.
turns out there was only 2 hormones that showed any anabolic effect following the workout. One of them was growth hormone, which isn't that surprising, but the other one was cortisol. And people, when you say that, wait, cortisol anabolic, how can that be? Because what happens is after a workout, remember I talked about how cortisol, one of the secondary effects of it is it basically, cortisol is a stress hormone that marshals energy reserves under stress. Cortisol causes your liver to break down glycogen very rapidly to keep your blood glucose up, which you need under a stressful condition. But it also marshals the release of fat from fat cells. And when it does that, after a workout, the fat that cortisol helps to release actually powers muscle protein synthesis, which is an anabolic effect. That's why cortisol's anabolic. See, people don't realize that.
Yeah.
So there's just all kinds of, but of course, I'm not saying cortisol always good. I mean, again, if you overtrain, if you're one of these people that trains for 4 hours or does 4 hours of aerobics, yes, then the cortisol is going to go up to very high levels. And unfortunately, cortisol has a yin yang effect with other anabolic hormones. It basically nullifies a lot of the testosterone effects. It interferes with growth hormone. Now you're going to get a catabolic effect. So a lot of it has to do with what you do. In other words, but if you exercise sensibly, for example, one quick way, if you're really worried about cortisol, one quick way to nullify it, if you don't want cortisol to go up after a workout, is to just take in some carbohydrates.
Right.
Because remember, cortisol works to stimulate fuel sources.
Right.
It's taking in a readily available source of energy like carbohydrates. There's no need for the body to kick out the cortisol.
Don't some people take or some trainees take carbohydrate-based drinks during a workout for similar benefit or similar protocol?
Yeah. That will actually depress cortisol. That's been shown, especially in men over 40. For some reason, that works better in older men. It actually lowers their cortisol while they work out. But unfortunately, it also slightly raises insulin, especially if it's a simple carb. And the raising of insulin is going to cause you to blunt all use of fat as an energy source. So you're going to be using the carbs, but you're not going to be using fat as an energy source.
Right. So you may get better performance, but you're not going to get better physique composition benefit as a result.
That's the way to look at it.
There.
Right. That's right. That's the way it works.
Now, with people that do, let's say, marathons or long duration aerobic exercise, could they just consume, let's say, carbohydrates every 15 to 20 minutes, and would that negate the negatives with cortisol?
Actually, it would. In fact, some of the marathon races, they have these little stations where they give them they have carbohydrate drinks where they give them little paper cups where they don't even stop running. You can see them; they'll grab the cup and keep running, and they drink it as they're running. That's not water. A lot of people think it's water. It's not water. Sometimes it is water.
Sorry about that.
but in a lot of cases, it's a carbohydrate solution that contains maybe 6% carbohydrate. You don't want to give more than let's say 7 or 8% carbs in a drink when you're exercising, especially because too many carbs actually blocks the uptake of fluid like water. So that's not a good idea. So you got to keep the carbs in low concentration. See, and if you throw in a little bit of fructose in there, at maybe a 4-to-1 ratio between, let's say, fructose and glucose, it actually speeds. You can actually increase the carbohydrate because fructose and glucose have two different glucose carriers. Fructose has GLUT5 and glucose has GLUT4. Because of that, they have separate glucose carriers. You can actually absorb more carbohydrate if you put a little bit of fructose in one of those carbohydrate drinks. Not too much, though, because if you put too much fructose, now you're going to get gastrointestinal and you're going to feel nauseous. So you got to be careful of that. See.
Yeah, and doesn't fructose also have a negative impact on insulin sensitivity as well as leptin sensitivity?
In large amounts, yeah. See, that's another thing. See, that's another thing what people get wrong. They think, I think we've talked about this before. They have this idea that all fructose is bad. In other words, don't eat fruit because it has fructose.
Right, exactly.
First of all, if you look at the fructose content, a lot of it's like 4% fructose.
Right.
Very little fructose. The truth of the matter, there's two things to consider about fructose. First of all, if you're active, if you're physically active, very often fructose is not a problem at all because you're going to burn it up. You know what I mean? You're going to burn it up. However, if you're sedentary and you take in more than, let's say, 100 grams a day of fructose, especially the quicker acting fructose, like high fructose corn syrup, then you can have a buildup of triglycerides in the liver. It can lead to fatty liver. Like you say, it adversely affects leptin. So it depends on how much you use. But another way to look at fructose is that people don't realize fructose is actually the preferential carbohydrate to replenish liver glycogen. The body will, as when you take fructose, the first step will be to replenish any liver glycogen that's been depleted, even more so than glucose. So as a recovery stuff, it's not bad. But again, it's more of a danger if you're inactive. And the truth is that, as we both know, with all the processed food, you look at every label, high fructose corn syrup. I mean, it's not that hard to get too much. If you're not active and you're eating a lot of processed food, there is a big danger of getting too much processed fructose. But as far as the fructose in fruit, remember, the fiber in fruit also has a nullifying effect on the fructose. It modifies the fruit. People don't realize that. So the notion that you shouldn't eat fruit because of the fructose is absolutely absurd. It's right up there with eating only egg whites. It's a stupid idea. It makes no sense. Now, if you're going to eat, 10, 15 pounds of fruit at a time, yeah, then you might run into a little bit of problem. But I haven't heard of too many people doing that. Nobody eats 10.
I don't think you could eat that much fruit if you wanted to, because it's so filling, right?
It's
You have a
like,
bowl. I mean,
yeah,
I love blueberries, but I don't binge on blueberries. Meaning, if I have a bowl of blueberries for dessert, I'm not going, man, let me get another bowl and another bowl and another bowl. But if I have a bowl of cornflakes, you can eat the whole box. You can just, in fact, you're going to be provoked to keep
right,
going.
right.
One bowl is not going to be enough.
Yeah, you see, there's a kind of fail-safe mechanism with fruit because, as you said, the fiber will fill you up where you just can't eat past a certain point.
Right.
Now that doesn't. This is the problem with fruit juices. It's devoid of fiber. So with processed fruit juice, you can wind up getting too much fructose. You could say that fruit juice is a processed food, even though people think, well, orange juice is healthy, this and that. It's still a processed food because when you remove the fiber, it's processed. It's that simple. It's a processed food. I'm not saying that you should completely cut out. If you like fruit juice, go ahead and have it, but don't go crazy on it because you got to keep in mind it's a processed carbohydrate. In large amounts, it's not good for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now with cortisol, another point is ideally you want your cortisol to be somewhat elevated in the morning, right? That's what gets you out of bed. That little bit of adrenaline, you're ready to go, and then you want it low in the evening so it doesn't have a negative impact on sleep. And often when people are dealing with what they think is high cortisol, often what they're dealing with is actually really low cortisol. They've had adrenal burnout, so now they wake up, they're tired, they need a couple of cups of coffee to get the motor running. And then finally, the cortisol kicks in the evening, and now they're wide awake and they can't go to sleep. So now you have another terrible night of sleep, and you're stuck in this vicious cycle.
That's true. But what you said, that's the actual natural pattern of cortisol.
Yeah.
It peaks in the morning and then gradually declines during the day. And by the night, it should be at a nadir. It should be low. But as you point out, for various reasons, whether it's stress or whatever, a lot of people have elevated cortisol, and it will interfere with sleep. A lot of the reasons why sleep deprivation is so prevalent is because people have elevated cortisol levels at night. And remember, cortisol is a fight or flight hormone. It's a stress hormone. It's going to marshal energy sources. It's going to marshal, stimulate catecholamine production. Right. And that's going to make, what does it do? It makes you like really alert. It's like taking a cup of, you're not going to be able to sleep like that. It's no surprise that it keeps you awake, I mean, there's a lot of supplements that they sell to nullify the nighttime cortisol level, supposedly, to help you sleep. There's certain natural herbs that supposedly do that. But interestingly enough, the supplement most associated with lower cortisol levels, which you might have heard of, phosphatidylserine.
Oh, yeah, sure.
The studies that showed, and they did show as much as a 30% decrease in cortisol. They think the mechanism, they're not sure, would be that the phosphatidylserine somehow depresses the release of adrenal corticotrophic hormone, or ACTH, from the pituitary. That controls cortisol output at the level of the adrenals. They think that phosphatidylserine inhibits that. That's the theory. Yeah. Now, the problem with that is that the studies that showed that used a form of phosphatidylserine taken from bovine sources. In other words, cow brains. Right. Now, you might know that those same tissues were later shown to be associated with prions, which are these type of abnormal proteins that are associated with some really severe brain, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which occurred in some people that took early forms of growth hormone. It literally causes your brain to look like what is it? What's the Swiss cheese? Is that the ones with the holes in it? It basically destroys your brain. A horrible way to die. And because of the fear of prion contamination of phosphatidylserine, because it was derived from cow brains, they switched to a soy version, right? Now, unfortunately, the soy version does not have the cortisol lowering effect. A lot of people don't know that.
Oh,
And
why is that? Do you know? You would think it would be the same thing,
you know
just
what?
different sources.
I'll tell you why. Because it turns out that the natural cortisol, I'm sorry, the natural original phosphatidylserine, it had a little bit of DHA attached to it.
Okay.
DHA, of course, is one of the primary omega-3 fatty acids. The DHA pulled the bovine PS or phosphatidylserine into the brain tissue. See, the soy doesn't have the DHA. So because of that, the theory is that, it doesn't work as well, getting into the brain and this and that. But
Right.
I mean, I've seen some evidence that phosphatidylserine, the soy version, does do a lot of the brain benefit effects of PS, but it doesn't lower the cortisol to the same extent as the bovine. So you don't want to depend on soy-based phosphatidylserine, to lower cortisol. However, I this is just strictly speculation on my part. I think if you somehow maybe took a fish oil supplement or something, or if you're a vegetarian, an algae DHEA source, and you combined it with then you're basically duplicating the bovine PS. That might actually work to lower cortisol.
Right.
This is just I'm
I see some blends that do that. I don't know if they're doing it for this specific reason because I haven't heard this before, but they do. There are some formulations out there that combine those things. I did some experimenting with phosphatidylserine in the 1990s. Remember when it was actually in Iron Man magazine, they used to sell a supplement called Cord Block.
That's
So
right.
there's always a lot of literature on phosphatidylserine. Like, okay, this sounds interesting. Now, usually it came in 100 milligram capsules. So
Right.
to duplicate what the recommended dose was, 600, 800 milligrams, you're taking 68 caps, and it's
Right.
crazy expensive. Because I mean, it's 30 caps. I think at that time was $50.
That's
So
right.
it's expensive. So when I started making a few bucks, I did an experiment where I took 600 to 800 milligrams before a workout, and it actually had a really negative impact on my workout, meaning that it made me really tired before going in. So,
Yeah.
and I always wondered if that negative effect was because it lowered cortisol too much, before going into the workout, or maybe some other mechanism.
It might have. Maybe it did work to lower cortisol, because that would make you tired. Because as I said again,
I mean,
cortisol.
training, I go, this is great because
Yeah,
sometimes you're wired, you're wound up. And I
yeah,
did find that not even that heavy of a dosage too, maybe 200 to 300 milligrams at night had somewhat of a relaxing effect.
right, right.
But I talked about this with Charles Poliquin a while back because he used to be a big advocate of phosphatidylserine, but he changed his tune, not so much changed his tune. He said he just found that theanine worked a lot better and was more inexpensive in terms of relaxation, getting people in a relaxed state at night so they fall asleep.
I would agree with that. But see, the thing about cortisol is that people, it's most famous for being an anti-inflammatory.
Right.
It's the primary anti-inflammatory hormone in the body. Now, what happens is if you get a genuine, significant lowering of cortisol, you will feel it. Any ache that you have in your body, any joint pain, is going to be magnified like 100 times. And I'll give you an example. Years ago, I don't know if they still do it, I doubt it, but in the 90s, a lot of the bodybuilders were using a drug called Cytodrin. Cytodrin was used to treat a disease called, let me think which one was, Cushing's syndrome, which involved too much cortisol, right? Now, what happens is it turns out that this particular drug, it worked to nullify an enzyme needed in the early production of all steroid hormones, including testosterone and estrogen. So if you took Cytodrin at a certain dose, minimal dose, something like a quarter of a tablet, it would actually lower your estrogen, and it also would have a slight diuretic effect. And bodybuilders considered it a hardening drug. It would make them look more hard, right?
Right.
Unfortunately, the mindset that if a quarter tablet's good, then maybe 4 tablets will make me even harder looking.
Right.
Unfortunately, 4 tablets was the full dose to knock out excess cortisol. Now, these guys didn't have excess cortisol. They had
Yeah.
normal. So when they took 4 tablets, they completely their cortisol went down to nothing. I mean, they still had enough where they would die, but what happened is they literally couldn't move.
Yeah.
And walking. I went into at one contest. One of these guys took too much. Well, he didn't take too much. He took Cytodrin and another drug called Omeatrin. He didn't realize they were the same drug, and he doubled up on it. He wound up taking a cortisol reducing dose, but he didn't realize it was an accident. They called me to his room, and he was lying spread eagle on the bed. He couldn't. His fiance was crying. She thought he was dying because he couldn't move. And he says, Jerry, I can't move. He says, I can't. I said, what do you mean? He says, everything hurts. So what I did is I had to think fast, and his manager he had a manager. I told him to go get some water because he's probably dehydrated, and get minerals. Buy some minerals, and hopefully we'll give him a little glucose. Hopefully it'll work. Luckily it did. Within about 45 minutes, the guy was up and walking around. He wound up winning the contest. This guy was a very famous bodybuilder. He wrote an autobiography later on. He said that I saved his life. That's a little bit hyperbolic. I don't know about that, but I'm glad it worked for him. Let's put it that way. I only tell the story to show you what happens if you completely knock out cortisol, because it is, and you might not feel it, but cortisol is controlling a lot of the inflammation in the body. And if you take it away, any pain you have in your body, any pain, whether it's joint or anything else, is to come to the fore, and you're going to feel it really bad, really bad.
People don't realize how important it is. The anti-inflammatory thing is often what people forget. And having somewhat of a cortisol release after training also comes with that anti-inflammatory benefit. So it actually helps induce recovery.
Right. In fact, I've known guys who took that upper dosage that you were talking about, let's say the 800 milligrams of phosphatidylserine, and, contrary to what the studies say, that the soy version doesn't affect cortisol, these guys would come back to me and say, hey, Jerry, I had to cut down the dose of phosphate. Why? What happened? After I'd work out, my joints were so sore, I couldn't even raise my arm.
Wow.
I said, you think it was the phosphatidylserine? He said, well, when I cut it out, 2 days later, I felt fine. I said to him, it must have been the phosphatidylserine. I mean, it lowered, like I said, the early studies said it showed that it lowered it about 30%. Now, if you're training hard, that might be enough where if you do have some prominent joint pain, it'll come to the fore. Again, another example of the anti-inflammatory effect of cortisol. And, cortisol's famous. World-class athletes, when they can't, football players, they're famous for injecting cortisol injections, so they could run it. It's a Band-Aid approach, though. See, when you inject cortisol, it's not healing anything. All it does is lower the inflammation to the extent where you don't feel any pain. Right. That's the power of cortisol. That's how powerful it is.
Something useful, but in a lot of ways, it's making it worse because now you're gonna behave as if everything is okay. You're gonna make the situation even worse.
That's the big danger. So you think that it's just a Band-Aid. Cortisol is not affecting healing at all. In fact, if you use it too much, it actually helps to break down connective tissue. So there's a real danger there. All it is a temporary Band-Aid. You have to emphasize, cortisol does not heal. It lowers inflammation. It's not a healing substance. See, strangely enough, steroids would be. I mean, stuff like testosterone, that does heal. Cortisol doesn't heal, but it does have extremely potent anti-inflammatory effect.
Yeah. Think about, have you heard about people, I know peptides are really big right now. I don't know how familiar you are with that world, but that's something I've been researching quite a bit, and I've tried some different compounds, and they're very interesting. Now, one thing I heard about Carl Lenore, Carl, right? You've been on his show. Yeah, Carl's a great guy. So anyway, I was listening to his show recently, Superhuman Radio, and he had a doctor on, and they were talking about the benefits of supplementing oxytocin. Right. And one of the things they said is Carl was saying that he likes to take a pretty high dosage of oxytocin, inject it right after a workout because it lowers the cortisol level, puts him in a relaxed state. And then apparently he also mentioned that there's some anabolic, right? Trenbolone, I believe, which is considered one of the strongest anabolics. Right. And apparently one of the reasons why it's so strong is that it increases oxytocin 200 times. higher than I don't know if I don't know if that's the exact amount. I'm just recalling this from memory. But I'm curious what you think about this approach, using oxytocin as a way to.
Honestly, I haven't seen any medical literature about that effect of oxytocin. I know that oxytocin, however, does have a relationship with testosterone. Apparently, oxytocin does seems to have a stimulatory effect on testosterone. When
Okay,
they give it to older animals, it seems to actually bring back low testosterone to normal. You know,
right.
as far as lowering cortisol, I guess it's possible. I just haven't seen any research on that. And as far as trenbolone goes, that is well known to interfere to actually interfere with cortisol. It does have a pretty potent effect, as do all anabolic steroids. In fact, a secondary effect a lot of people don't realize. They know about the muscle building effects of steroids, but they don't realize that the long term effect of steroids, in other words, the muscle building effects are relatively short term. Your body kind of gets used to it after a couple of weeks. The reason they continue to work after that is they also have a secondary anti-catabolic effect in that they interfere with the binding of cortisol to receptors in muscle. In other words, when you have a high testosterone, whether it's from steroids or taking testosterone, it will actually interfere with the binding of cortisol to its receptors in muscle. If it can't bind to the receptors, there's no catabolic effect, and that keeps the muscles growing because you're basically in a pure anabolic state, and you can keep getting benefits. See, now on the other hand, if you get off, let's say you're on a high dose steroid program, and you get off at cold turkey just like that, now your testosterone, because you've suppressed your HPG axis, your body is not producing normal levels of testosterone, but it's still producing cortisol. So guess what? The cortisol run to those receptors, and suddenly your muscles are shrinking like butter on a hot stove. And that's what causes the massive. You see a lot of the guys when they get off steroids, their muscles, like a month later, they're down to like nothing. This is what's happened. They are in a high cortisol, relatively high cortisol, but it's because of the way they use the drugs. See,
It must be really hard to get off steroids when you start noticing the negatives so
yeah.
quickly. I mean, you just see your body deflating
Oh
each
yeah,
day. I
yeah.
can see why it's so addictive for some people where they're going, well, wait a minute, because you get used to being strong and powerful. And then when you see that withering away, it can make you panic.
Oh, a lot of people. I've heard of. There's also a depression effect that occurs
Yeah,
because steroids affect brain neurosteroids that actually elevate your mood, a feeling of well-being they call it. So again,
right.
if you get off the steroids cold turkey, you can go into a pretty big depression. That combined with, as you point out, the loss of muscle that you can literally before your eyes makes a lot of guys jump right back on the steroids. Now
Yeah,
a lot of them have this idea, well, I'm not going to take a huge stack. I'll just take like a minimal, two
right,
tablets here,
right,
one injection here. I'll be
right.
all right. It's a low dose. They don't understand that's not the way it works.
Yeah,
Each drug is based on time and dosage. In other words, it's not just the dose, it's how long you take it. If you don't give your body a break, you're going to get a cumulative effect, which is going to adversely affect your health. If you take low, what I'm trying to say, if you take low doses of steroids all the time, you're screwing yourself up. There's no way around it. You're causing some damage in your body. There's no such thing as taking safe dosage. I'm not talking about TRT. That's different. I'm talking, for example, oral steroids. All oral steroids, all of them cause a inflammation of the liver. When you get off them,
Proviron. I heard that one. I'm not super familiar with steroids, but
yeah,
Proviron I read about recently, and apparently that has low liver toxicity or minimal. Are you familiar with that?
yeah, yeah. Well, it does in comparison to the others. But
It's a
even
it's a mild anabolic compared to others too.
yeah,
So I
it's a,
think one just takes it on its own.
right. It's a mild anabolic, but see the thing is, even if you avoid, let's say, the liver problem, now
Yeah.
you still have the adverse effect on blood lipids, like an
Right.
elevation of
Right.
LDL and a lowering of LDL. And
That's
again,
right.
if you're lucky, that's not going to do anything. If you do everything right, you follow a good diet, it's not that bad. But let's say you have a genetic tendency in your family towards cardiovascular disease. You're walking around with this, let's say, elevated LDL level, lower HDL. Now you're at high risk. Now anything can happen. Again, if you're lucky and you're young and you're working out, nothing will happen, but you're still at higher risk. That's why that's what I'm talking about, the long-term dangers of staying on this stuff, you know.
Yeah, and I don't think people take the consequences. They don't take it. They don't see the consequences of it until they manifest the problems, and then they're going,
Right.
"Wow, here's becomes." When everything is going right, you're like, "No, I got this under control."
Right.
This is,
Well, also, you know, and then the cortisol comes into that play also, because
yeah,
when they get off the steroids, now the cortisol's got free reign to, you know, to interact with the receptors. So not only are they going to get shrunken muscles, but you know, now they're going to temporarily, before the cortisol fully kicks in, it takes, you know, a couple of days. They're relatively low in cortisol too, because it's been blocked. So they're going to get pain, joint pain too. That's another reason why they go right back on this. I can't walk around. I can't train. Everything hurts. So they go back on the steroids. That's
yeah.
another problem. See?
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. Honestly, that's why I never really got into experimenting with anabolics.
Yeah.
One, it's because it's illegal. I don't really know anyone, that's a reputable source to
Right.
buy from. What am I going to do? Just talk to someone at the gym I've never been? Yeah, sure. Let me check that in me. Hopefully, it's not olive oil. Because I never. But the other reason is that I have a fairly addictive personality. So if I take a bunch of stuff and I'm just getting gains like crazy, I'm going into the gym, I'm stronger every single time. That would be really hard to stop. So I'm better off never experiencing that, so I don't have to worry about stopping.
Right. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I've written about this in my Applied Metabolic Snoozer. If I were a competitive bodybuilder today, I'd be a little bit afraid to take steroids because I mean, I'm talking about black market steroids because, you know, a lot of them are made under unsterile conditions. They can have contaminants in it like heavy metals. There was
Yeah.
one case of a guy in Australia, 29-year-old guy. He bought some trenbolone at some internet site and had arsenic in it, and it killed him. The guy
Wow.
was a healthy young guy. He died.
Mm.
He was poisoned by arsenic from a trenbolone injection. And
Wow.
I mean, you see, the thing is, I always got into bodybuilding first and foremost for health reasons.
Right.
I wanted to be big. I wanted to have muscles when I was younger, but I never forsook the health aspect. I would
Yeah.
never do anything that would adversely affect my health for the sake of big muscles. This is why I never use a drug like DNP, dinitrophenol, because it's too close to being fatal. You know,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, even if it causes this tremendous loss of fat, the fact that you take a little bit too much and your body cooks from the inside, no,
Yeah, that's scary.
sorry, I won't do it. I won't do it.
That's really scary.
I won't touch it. I won't touch it. I mean, nothing. What? Nothing is worth giving your
No,
life up. I'm sorry.
no,
You know,
no.
I mean, some people say you're paranoid. Look at all the people that take it. Then nothing happens. I said, well, they're lucky, but they're basically taking a cellular poison. If that's what they want to do, more power to them. I'm out. I'm not doing it.
And the consequences of that may be realized later too. It may not be immediate where you're thinking, okay, I got away with it, and then it caused some underlying issue that took a while to manifest, and now you're dealing
Right.
with it. So you never know what you're playing around with.
Well,
It
well,
can be,
well,
okay.
with DNP, some people have an effect. You see, there's a certain standard dose range of DNP that's supposed to be safe, right? Some
Yeah,
people, though, unfortunately, has a cumulative effect. Instead of being broken down as it would normally be, it accumulates, and by the fourth day, they're into a toxic level, and they die. This is the people that die from DNP. It happened. I can't remember the name. A couple of years ago, there was a famous basketball player that, you know, he was with a couple of friends, young guy, you know, top player. They were sitting around sniffing, you know, snorting coke. He didn't realize that he genetically lacked the enzyme that normally breaks down cocaine. It accumulated in 2 hours, and it caused him to have heart failure. He died. He was a healthy young guy who didn't know he had this genetic defect. That's, you know, one of the problems there. Yeah, I mean, how do you know that whether the DMP is going to accumulate? You don't know until it happens, and then you're dead.
yeah.
I mean, it's not gonna. What do you? I guess I'm one of those people.
I think like what you said about why you got into bodybuilding and fitness is you want to be healthy, and I think that's the best reason to get into it. And that's the barometer that should guide your decisions as well,
Right.
especially if you want to do it for a long term and have the benefits of holding on to muscle and feeling strong as you get older. You want to be able to sustain that for a long period of time, not turn it up to this acute level where for a small window of your life, you're this training
Yeah.
machine and
Yeah.
stronger than you ever imagined. But now you deal with now the barometer goes the other way. You have to get off all the stuff, you lose everything. Now your body's beaten down, you're dealing with health consequences. Just defeats the whole purpose. It's not worth it. But you got into the scene during what I feel is the golden era, and it's often referred to as, not just my opinion, it's the golden era of bodybuilding. I mean, you look at people like Dave Draper and yourself when you're competing, and Schwarzenegger and Columbo, and I mean, you guys all looked great. You looked healthy. You
Yeah.
were big, muscular guys, but you looked healthy. Now it seems now you got the GH distended guts. You got this ridiculously massive people where they can't even walk in a line. I mean,
Right.
you couldn't possibly buy clothes at any regular store. You have to have everything tailor made.
Right.
And they don't move like athletes. While
No.
people like Franco Columbo, he was a boxer. He did other things. He was a good swimmer. I remember I used to get chiropractic adjustments from Franco when I lived in LA. And he said that he and Arnold were always active with other stuff. They're playing tennis, they're going swimming, they're running on the beach. It wasn't just lifting weights and then you sit around all day.
That's true. That's true. These guys, they're limited. I mean, I look at like this guy who just won the Olympia, Big Ramy,
Yeah, yeah.
and he says he weighs 290 pounds, and
Wow.
he's 5'10".
Wow.
And I'm thinking, all I could think of is when I look at him, that what's going on internally with this guy. I mean, what's going on inside his body? What's going to happen with a guy like that? If he's lucky, maybe he'll somehow live. I don't know, but the odds are that this guy's going to have a health problem sooner or later. The amount of drugs he must be taking, especially when I saw before photos, this guy wasn't that big a guy. He was a skinny guy at one time.
Wow.
I mean, there's got to be a price to pay. I mean, there's no free lunch with that stuff. That's the way it is.
I think the human brain is so targeted towards addiction that things that start off healthy can become really negative as a result because your set point for satisfaction keeps going higher. So initially you may start off and say, okay, once I hit these goals, I'm going to feel great. And then you hit those goals and now you're dissatisfied again. So now you have to step it up to satisfy, step it up to satisfy. And you just get into this vicious cycle of you're never satisfied, but you keep thinking if I can just do more, bigger muscles, lift more weights, run faster, I'm going to stay on top of this and feel satisfied all the time.
Oh, by the way, I just thought of a funny thing as you're saying that. Some guy just left a comment. I do these YouTube videos. Some troll left a comment under my video. He called me a low testosterone soy boy. and my first thought was, how does this guy know I'm low testosterone? I mean, do I have like a high voice or something? I mean, where is this guy calling me low testosterone? And as far as soy boy, what the hell does that mean? Soy boy. I mean, what? In other words, anyone who drinks soy, has low testosterone?
Well, there's still that myth that's promulgated of soy increasing estrogen levels through the roof.
Yeah.
And you've addressed that in your newsletter. You talked about how phytoestrogens in soy are 1/10,000th the power of the real thing, and that they may dock in certain estrogen receptors and block stronger estrogens from going in. Now, there's some negatives with soy too, but I think the estrogenic negative has been totally inflated. I think, like you said, in your article, you would have to be on a 100% soy diet. You're just drinking soy milk all day. You're eating tofu all day. You're just eating soy to actually manifest a problem.
Well, the only men in the medical literature, the only men that have ever had, let's say, estrogen-based problems like gynecomastia, male breast formation, these are guys who are eating a lot of soy. I mean, the guy I could think of, I think he was about 19 years old. This guy, I think he was drinking like 4 gallons a day of soy milk or something like that, or tofu, I can't remember. But he was eating massive amounts. I mean, there comes to be a point where if you're taking a massive amount, you're going to get an estrogen effect. But small amounts of soy, they've shown over and over, it has no estrogenic effect in men. None. Zero. And as far as testosterone, zero. No effect. And yet this stuff is still promulgated all over the internet. You see these blogs, don't eat soy. It'll feminize you and lowers your testosterone. You can't make, It's all crap. It's all, just not based on anything. Nothing.
No, and even when you show people compelling information, like one of your articles, people still like, well, I don't believe that. I was like, well, it's not about belief. This is not religion where you have to have faith. We're looking at data here, and the
Well,
data just shows that what you feel is a problem is not an issue.
well, I would answer that by saying, you could go to the top of a huge, a tall building and believe you can fly and jump off the building. You could believe all you want. You're still going to straight down, and
Right.
they're going to gather your body, your pieces all over the sidewalk. You could believe all you want. It's not going to help because the science of the fact is there's gravity. There's,
Right.
and boom, you can't fly. You're going to go right down. So
Right.
believe all you want. It's not going to change anything.
Yeah. 100%.
I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, but the whole soy boy thing that it comes from that soy is associated with estrogen. So it's basically saying, "Oh, you estrogen dominant twat," or "You estrogen dominant." It's basically the equivalent of saying that.
You
You
know
need
what?
to come up with a new term though that's more accurate.
These morons don't realize, for one thing, male body does produce estrogen, you know,
Right.
and it does a couple of important things. I'm not saying that we all want to take, inject estrogen or take estrogen-based drug. But what I'm saying is that, for example, a lot of people don't know estrogen is involved in muscle recovery. It's very important for muscle recovery. And a couple of years ago, I wrote about this in my newsletter. They discovered that there's two estrogen receptors, A and B, right? One of them, I believe it's estrogen receptor A, is involved in the stimulation and differentiation of satellite cells, which are muscle stem cells heavily involved in the repair and building hypertrophy of muscles, I should say. And estrogen is intimately involved there. So if you
Right.
cut out estrogen, you're actually interfering with your muscle growth.
Right.
Again, you don't want to have too much because then you do get estrogen effects, gyno, and you get some subcutaneous fat buildups, some
Right.
water retention, and this and that. But I joke around. I said, I'm glad I have a little estrogen because maybe it makes me more human. I mean, maybe it makes me have some of women's emotions where I have more sympathy and empathy for people. If it's doing that, then I want the estrogen.
I think well, hey, maybe when you have a high testosterone and then you have a good ratio of testosterone to estrogen, you feel like $1,000,000 because you
Right.
feel confident because of the testosterone. The optimal estrogen level makes you more empathetic. So
Right.
you're not someone who has to overcompensate in any way. Because often when someone gets into a fight at a bar, someone will be, oh, that guy's got too much testosterone.
Yeah.
And in reality, that's probably someone who doesn't have enough. So he has to overcompensate and act out in these
Yeah.
destructive ways.
Well, it's funny that you say that because the study, you've heard of this stuff called roid rage,
Oh
where,
yeah.
where they say that taking steroids or high testosterone will make you like this maniac, who just attacks everybody and wants to fight at the drop of a hat. Well, here's the ironic part. In the studies, when they've tested this, they found that the angriest guys, the guys with the shortest fuse, were low testosterone guys, not elevated testosterone guys. The lowest testosterone were the angriest guys. And as far as the roid rage goes, there's a simple answer for that. Steroids emphasize what's already there. In other words, to put it bluntly, if you're a prick, taking steroids in high doses is going to make you more of a prick.
Right.
But if
Right.
you're a nice guy, taking steroids is not going to turn you into Jekyll and Hyde, where you suddenly become this bastard who wants to hurt everybody and fight everybody. That's bullshit. That's the
Yeah.
media and spreading that around, because they see some athletes act badly. Every time an athlete does something bad, oh, it's the steroids doing that. No,
Yeah.
it's not the steroids. It's the guy's a prick to begin with. The football player that punches his girlfriend in the face, steroids didn't make him do that. He's a prick. That's it. It's that simple.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's that simple.
Let's talk a little bit about what we can do to make our immune systems more resilient or just be as healthy as possible, because we're all in this COVID world. It doesn't matter what part of the world you're living in. We're all dealing with COVID. It's stressful to everybody. And there's severity of stress for people that are dealing with financial repercussions as well. But even for those of us who aren't, it's still stressful just having this looming all the time. So I think one thing that we don't hear talked about much is what we can do to avoid overburdening the medical care system. And one of those things we can do, in addition to all the other guidelines we're all aware of, is make yourself as healthy as possible. So you're not a liability. So that if you come into contact with this, you can just self-treat at home. Maybe you just have mild symptoms and you get over it quickly.
Well, here's the thing, Mike. You hear there's two types of people when they get the COVID-19. There's usually two categories. One of them is what they call the mild cases, where it seems like a flu almost. That's why people down. In fact, this is what causes people to downplay COVID, because that somebody had it and they had a flu, maybe a couple of muscle aches, and they seem to be okay and they got over it themselves. So they downplay. Oh, it's not that serious. It's just a bad flu.
Right.
Now, on the other range, you have people that get it so bad that the fluid fills up in the lungs. They got to be put on respirators or ventilators, and only 10% of the people that are put on ventilators survive. Most of them, when you get to that point, you're in big trouble. Now, you have to say to yourself, what differentiates these two groups? Why does one group get this mild case where they seem to just get like a little bit sick and maybe some muscle aches and like a flu-like symptoms, and they're fine? You know what the difference is? The people that get the milder cases have better immune systems. So what you want to do to protect yourself, before you get any vaccine or anything like that, of course, you want to follow the general, don't go near other people. What is it? What's that? Social distancing. And by the way, they tell people that 6 feet is proper social. The truth of the matter is, and people won't like to hear this, it's actually 12 feet, because they've tested it. When people sneeze or even when they talk, the virus can spread up past 6 feet and go as much as 7, 8 feet. 12 feet is the safe social day. I just want to point that out. You want to wash your hands a lot. You want to wash your hands a lot, because just normal soap completely kills the COVID. Boom. Wash them for 30 seconds. It's gone. It's off your hands. And a lot of times you can get COVID by touching a surface. Somebody has COVID. They touch the surface. You touch the same thing, and then you touch your face. You've injected yourself with COVID. That's why you don't want to touch it. That's one of the reasons you wear masks, not just to protect, against it or prevent giving it to others, but also to remind yourself not to touch your face when you're outside, because you never know when you've touched something, right? But besides all that, what you can do as an individual to protect yourself is do everything you can to strengthen your immune system. This is when nutrition comes into play. And I know you're a subscriber. I don't know if you saw my article. I mean, this is probably the most extensive article I've done in the entire newsletter. The thing was like 50 pages alone. I covered every nutrient known to man that could possibly affect. Now, I pointed out in the article, most of the information was preliminary. But if you look at the mechanisms, like there's a ACE receptor that the SARS-CoV-2, that's the virus that causes COVID-19. It has to interact with this thing called the ACE receptor. Some of the nutrients, like for example, vitamin C and quercetin, just to name two off the bat, they work by interfering with the binding of the virus to the ACE receptor. If it can't bind with the ACE receptor, it can't get into the body. So what's going to happen is you're going to have a certain amount of protection. I'm not saying that you can't get it, but the thing is you're much less likely to get it. You know what I'm saying? Now, then you look at something like vitamin D. Just about every other day since I wrote that article, there's been like 15 studies since then about vitamin D and COVID, about how it has such a protective effect. They found that people in the hospitals that are in that situation where they're on ventilators, the ones that have low active vitamin D in their body, 25 hydro, the hormonal form, those are the ones most likely to die. The ones that have more adequate vitamin D levels are the ones more likely to survive. Now that's a big thing there. That's big. We're talking life and death.
Yeah.
What does vitamin D do? Well, a lot of people don't realize vitamin D is needed to activate killer T cells. Those are the cells that basically destroy viruses in your body. If there's no vitamin D, or if the vitamin D is low, the killer T cells get lazy. They just kind of sit there. Like this guy who lives next door to me, he sits and watches TV 15 hours a day. That's the way the T cells get. They just sit there. They don't do anything. The vitamin D makes them move around, active, go after that damn virus. You know what I'm saying? So there's a host of, as I point out in the article, there's many other. There's a lot of herbs that help. Also by basically by stimulating the immune system and giving you a kind of initial defense against the virus. So again, I have to emphasize, I'm not saying that being replete in all these nutrients, that if you're exposed to the virus, that you're not going to get it. I'm not going to say that. What I am saying is if you are, let's say, replete in these various nutrients, if you are unfortunate enough to get it, it's going to be the milder case that you will survive. But there's one thing to remember here, and a lot of people overlook this fact. There's no such thing as a mild case of COVID in the sense, every time you get COVID, there's going to be some permanent damage somewhere in your body.
Right.
And they have what they call, some people get COVID, like they'll get it for only 2 weeks, but then they get these residual effects that last for months. They get muscle pain, joint pain, they get brain problems. They just go on and on and on. So my point here, what I'm trying to say is you want to try and avoid getting it. Don't look at COVID as this mild flu, like, oh, if I get it, it's no big deal. No, it's a big deal because even if you survive, something is going to happen in your body. It could be gastrointestinal, brain, it could be joints. You're going to feel something for, it could be years, it could be lifetime. Nobody knows that yet. But you want to do everything you can to avoid it. Again, use the measures that they're saying, social distancing, washing the hands. For crying out loud, don't have parties and breathe in each other's face. Anywhere from 25 to 40% of people walking around are asymptomatic. They got the damn virus in their bodies, but they're not showing any symptoms. A lot of these people, I feel fine. I don't need to wear a mask. And they walk around and they breathe on people. They're the super spreaders. This is the reason why here in LA, the numbers keep going up by the thousands every day. Why? Because a lot of these people are spreading it. They don't even realize they have it. So, you can't go by that. You have to be on guard all the time. And again, if you're smart, you're going to make sure you get these nutrients, vitamin D, these certain herbs, as vitamin C, quercetin. Zinc is very important. Zinc is extremely important. Zinc also does things that basically block the virus from getting into the cells. Very important to have. You got to get these nutrients. If you do that and you do the other measures, I would say there's a very good chance that even if this vaccine takes a while, to get to you, you will be able to avoid getting COVID-19 if you're smart. But if you're stupid, if you think that, well, this guy, it's all exaggerated, you'll probably get it. Especially if you're in an area that's where it's literally epidemic, like here in LA. I don't trust anybody. When I'm walking my dog, I mean, most of the people, I have to say, if I'm walking down the street, they'll walk in the street. I think that's actually smart. I mean, sometimes I forget to wear the mask, and they're smart to keep away from me. I could be a carrier. They're not stupid. I don't get mad. I don't look at, hey, what the fuck is wrong with you? Well, what are you walking to? I don't get. I think they're being smart to do that. You know what I mean? So this is what you have to do. You have to build up your. Oddly enough, though, one of the reasons why people die from COVID, the main reason, is because of an overactive immune system. And it's what they call cytokine storm. Right. Cytokines are proteins produced by immune cells that cause a lot of the really bad lung effects that causes people to go on the ventilator. But even there, that's caused by an aberration in the immune system. Usually it happens with people that have a low immune system. In other words, again, their immune system down from, let's say, bad nutrition, too much stress, not enough sleep, no exercise. There's a lot of reasons why. But what happens is when the immune system does kick in, when they get the virus, instead of reacting normally, it goes into overdrive, winds up destroying good tissue. It could, in most cases, the lungs, and you go on a ventilator. That's what happens. So it's all related to the immune system in one way or another.
Yeah, and the thing, and all the nutraceuticals that you mentioned are fairly inexpensive. I mean, vitamin C is cheap. Vitamin C is dirt cheap.
Right.
Quercetin, which I've been taking this whole time because my friend Dr. Gordon recommended that in one of his newsletters, and when I talked to him about measures, so I've been taking quercetin, vitamin C, zinc, and vitamin D I've always taken. I just increased that a little bit.
Right.
And then I'm taking glutathione on top of that because I saw some data that people that experienced really severe symptoms had really depleted glutathione levels.
That's true.
And that can be more expensive. So that would be the on the lower end of the recommendation. Start with quercetin, vitamin C, zinc, things like that. Vitamin D, those are all really important and they're fairly inexpensive too.
Or you could take, if you want a good glutathione precursor, you could take N-acetylcysteine.
There you go.
Or even whey. Whey has what they call whey protein. Well, of course, you're a vegan. I know that, but I mean,
yeah, but it has high cysteine levels, right? Is that why it also increases?
It has what they call free cysteine. That is the immediate precursor for glutathione. That's why NAC works, because it's a stable form of cysteine.
Right.
Glutathione is just basically a tripeptide. It's 3 amino acids, but the one that's, let's say, rate limiting, is cysteine. So if you get cysteine in your body, you have glutathione. So a cheap way to do it, NAC is not that expensive, but
right.
It's as a matter of fact, the NAC has been the standard treatment for a type of mushroom poisoning. I think it's called Amanita mushroom. They call it death head mushrooms. If you eat this mushroom, it immediately depletes all the glutathione in your liver, and you die of liver failure. You actually die. So if you eat this mushroom and get to an emergency room in time, they will give you an injection of acetylcysteine, which immediately, that fast, and when you inject it, it immediately builds up the glutathione in the liver. It saves your life. It works that fast.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy that something found in nature could have that effect. Because people always think, oh, if it's natural, it saves. Like, no, there's a lot of things that are in nature that are extremely deadly. I mean, they're poisonous, life-threatening.
Hey, listen, green potatoes have something in it called solanine, which is a nerve toxin.
Right.
But I don't know. Would you eat a green potato? I wouldn't.
No, I don't think I've ever seen a green potato.
I never have either. But apparently, I mean, there are certain that I can go on and on with this. There are, as you say, a lot of natural foods have natural toxins. But the good news is these toxins are in forms of the food that people don't normally eat.
Right.
So I was just reading. I often take what they call a coffee. What is it called? A green coffee extract. I take that because it's high in this. What is the name of this substance? Sorry, I can't remember. But it's high in this substance that helps you modify your blood glucose. Because I'm pre-diabetic. I do everything to control it. And then I came across a medical report. Apparently, a lot of green tea supplements are contaminated with this stuff that could be toxic. So I said, well, I like to have that substance, but it's not worth it. I'm not going to take the chance. So I stopped taking green coffee because apparently a lot of the green coffee supplements have this natural toxin that's not in regular coffee, because of course regular coffee, they basically brew, they cook it, the stuff is destroyed, but
that was the problem you mentioned with green tea extracts a while back.
Yeah.
Where green tea extracts, it's somewhat of an anomaly, but for some people it can be extremely toxic to the liver.
Yeah, exactly right. Unfortunately,
rolling dice.
Yeah, they call that SNPs, which is polymorphisms. I can't remember the first part of it. Basically, these are slight genetic changes that causes you to vary the way you process different things you take in your body. Like some people have genetic changes where if they take in caffeine, even small amounts of caffeine give them really bad effects, anxiety, shakes, and even heart arrhythmias. They don't break down the caffeine rapidly enough, whereas most people are able, they break down the caffeine. All they get is, they get a little bit of stimulation. That's about it. And same with the green tea. Some people, for some reason, it tends to build up in the liver, and it actually can be very toxic to the liver. Some people have actually had liver failure from taking green tea. It's scary to think about, but if you want to play it safe, what they found, if you do take remember, green tea extracts are concentrated forms of green tea, much higher than regular green tea. One green tea pill is equal to about 4 cups of green tea as far as the active ingredients.
Right.
Now, what they found is if you want to take a green tea extract, take it with food, because what they found is taking it alone, like on an empty stomach, is more likely to cause toxic effects. But when you take it with food, it's nullified. There's no toxic effects. It's a simple solution. You know.
Well, that's good to know. And then people that just drink green tea, is that something they should be concerned about as well, even if you're drinking quite a bit?
The only problem with drinking green tea itself, if you go to something like 9 or 10 cups a day, I'm talking a large amount,
That's a lot.
it'll start to interfere with thyroid function.
I see.
You can
Okay.
actually get low thyroid on that. You know, of course, there's here we go. There's a simple antidote to that too. And I do this because I know you're a vegan. Certain the cruciferous vegetables, which I know you're aware of, are the healthiest vegetables you can eat. For example, broccoli, because of the sulforaphane. Unfortunately, they also contain goitrogens in there, which basically work by trapping iodine, preventing it from being incorporated into your thyroid gland. Iodine is, I forget it, whether it's 1/3 or 2/3 of thyroid hormone is iodine. The rest of it is the amino acid tyrosine. Now, the simple solution to that is if you decide that you want to eat a lot of cruciferous vegetables because of the health benefits, or you want to take a lot of green tea, what you do is you take a separate iodine supplement at a different time. Now you're replacing the iodine. Now, I don't eat a tremendous amount of broccoli, but I do have it. I try to have it every day. We laughed about this. I hate vegetables, so I mix it in a kind of a blender. I put it in water, I drink it down. It's the only way I can take it because I hate broccoli. But I can't escape the health benefits. I have to have it. So what I do is in the morning, I take one, it's a just over the counter, it's a seaweed-based iodine, just one little capsule. I take that, and it's away from the broccoli because I take the broccoli later, and I'm covered. I don't have to worry about that. See, there's always solutions.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to know. And that's a simple one.
Yeah.
Kelp is really high in iodine, but you're saying that it's better, like instead of using kelp as a seasoning on, let's say, a broccoli stir fry, you're better off taking that kelp or an iodine supplement at another time so that there isn't interference.
Right. And also kelp, it is very rich in iodine, one of the richest sources. And kelp, again, the problem with iodine is that here we go again. If there's always this thing called hormesis, where it applies to everything, exercise, food, where a certain amount of a substance is really good for you. If you go past that point, it turns negative. It turns just the opposite. It becomes almost toxic. And a good example of that is the what is it? I got off track. What were you just asking me about? The
kelp and the iodine.
Iodine. If you take in too much iodine, you need iodine for thyroid synthesis, right? But if you take in too much, it has a reverse effect where it slows thyroid production.
Yeah.
In fact, they used to give something called Lugol solution before they had drugs. They gave people with when they had hyperthyroid, it was an overactive thyroid. They gave them Lugol solutions as basically just very concentrated source of iodine. When they give it to them, it would turn off the excess thyroid off because it basically was it blocked it supplied iodine, which basically turned off the thyroid. Too much iodine turned off the thyroid. So there's always a curve. But having when I was competing in bodybuilding, we were told that thyroid hormone helped burn fat. So I at one time was taking I got up to taking 50 tablets of kelp a day, and I don't know whether it hurt me or affected me at all. It's hard to say because I always lost a lot of body fat when I trained for a contest. I don't know the verse, but what I was doing was kind of dumb because I was working against my own thyroid, but I didn't know it at the time. Yeah. Back in those days, we heard that the iodine stimulated the thyroid, so take a lot of kelp. And I went overboard. I took 50 tablets a day, So who knows? I don't know. I was so young, I probably couldn't tell. I was only, I was in my early 20s, but now I know.
We're all mad scientists to some extent with training, and even those of us that do it recreationally, because we're always curious what's going to, just the idea that you can do something that improves performance or physique composition. I've always found that really intriguing. Yeah. I'm always interested in things that are performance enhancers.
Right. Well, I do the same thing these days with mental enhancers.
Yeah.
I'm always experimenting with these so-called smart nutrients and smart drugs.
Well, that, yeah.
And every time I come across a new one, I'll be honest with you, I'll check out, first of all, the first thing I do is check out any safety, if I can find studies to show how safe it is, if if there's a chance of any kind of toxicity, I won't do it, right? Like, for example, to give you a quick example off the top of my head, taking small doses, what they call micro doses of LSD, lysergic acid. You remember the LSD acid from the 60s?
Oh
That,
yeah.
that's supposed to be a tremendous brain stimulant. It's supposed to actually give you a lot of mental focus, clarity, right? But it's a freaking hallucinogen, and
Oh,
and I'd be afraid to take even a mic. I wouldn't touch it. I'm too, I wouldn't mess with it. The fact that it's a hallucinogen, that's too dangerous to me. It probably wouldn't hurt me, but I draw a line there. I won't do it.
yeah. Hallucinogenic compounds are starting to become a little bit more mainstream, but you have to be careful with things like that.
Yeah.
You never know how you're going to react to something like that.
Well, psilocybin's another one.
Yeah.
Psilocybin is a tremendous antidepressant,
Right.
but it's a mushroom and it's also a hallucinogen. So, unfortunately, here we go again. Due to certain genetic changes, some people might react badly to even small amounts of psilocybin, and they might actually go into a hallucinogenic trip. But you can't predict that.
Yeah, you don't know. You don't know until you try what does what.
So to me, the risk is not worth it. So I experiment with different, let's say, mental stimulation compounds, because I take them, especially when I write. I do find that they help me maintain clarity and focus, and they really help me writing, because the words come much easier to me. I'm like a damn machine when it's like me and the computer become one being.
You're completely dialed in.
Yeah. I mean, I only use them when the funny thing is I only take them when I'm actually writing. Like when I'm like if I'm editing or researching, I won't take them. It's only when I'm writing when I take them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's when you notice it the most. So it makes sense. Save it for when you exactly need it, not just taking it for the hell of it. You're going to have a regular day. There's no real need to have that kind of enhancement.
Exactly right. That's exactly, yeah.
Well, hey, man, this has been great. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Always informative and fun and entertaining. And I recommend everyone sign up for your newsletter at appliedmetabolics.com. I've been a subscriber for a couple of years, and you put out incredible amounts of information. People are going, $10? Why do I have to pay $10 for that? So much free information on the web. I go, yeah, there is a lot of free information, but not too many people have the time to discern what's good and what isn't. And yours is always substantiated with a lot of data. And I always say I appreciate the fact that you have summaries, because a lot of times when I look at a topic you've covered, I'll read the summary and then I'll go back and read the article if I want to know more. But the summary gives me the Cliff Notes version.
That's
so
right.
People really interested in performance enhancement. They want to know about different nutritional supplement protocols, training regimens. They should definitely check out your newsletter.
Yeah, and like you said, there's a lot of information available, but a lot of it's misinformation. See, that's the problem.
Doing more damage than good.
Like anybody can make a YouTube video or start a blog. Doesn't mean they know what they're talking about.
Right.
And my experience in looking at a lot of these things is that a lot of it's just garbage. It's just misinformation. Right. And I can guarantee that what they get in my Applied Metabolics is absolutely factual.
Oh,
yeah. I mean, they'll always get the truth.
100%. Come on. Just letting one of my dogs out here. Well, hey, I appreciate it. Let me go ahead and hit stop recording. Make sure we don't lose this.